The land didn't hum the way it used to. Once, the prairie grass sang lullabies under the sun. Now it whispered like something wounded. Dust clung to the air like smoke that never left, and the sky stretched wide and brittle overhead, a bowl of faded blue cracked by heat lines and silence. His ranch sat low in the valley, ribs of old timber and rusted tin like a half-sunk ship no one bothered to pull free. The wind moved through it slow and sure, whistling through the broken boards, rattling the chains that once tethered horses. But there were no horses now. Just one, and a man who never used his name anymore. He rose before the sun each day, not because he wanted to, but because his body didn't know how to sleep. Coffee boiled bitter in a blackened pot, and he drank it leaning on the porch rail. Watching the same hawk trace lazy spirals above the ridge, he moved like habit wrapped in. Skin, feed the cow, check the trough, mend the fence, curse the sky. There was no music, no letters, no fire in the hearth. He spoke to no one, save for the old Mare, who waited patient by the gate each morning. Still here, he'd mutter. And she'd flick her tail, as if to say, me too. The ground had long since stopped offering anything but thorns, grass yellowed to dust. The well spat mud some mornings. Even the jackrabbits had grown thin. It was near dusk. When the world turned soft around the edges, that he saw her, he was down by the south fence. Tightening barbed wire the wind had loosened. The sky was painted in tired oranges, shadows growing. Long like regrets, the wind changed. Not louder, just different. And he felt it before he saw her. A figure moved down the ridge, small, lurching, nearly folding with each step. At first, he thought it was a dying deer. Maybe a wild dog limping from a trap, but then the shape straightened for a breath, and he saw long black hair, tangled and heavy, swinging over a bare back, sun-scorched shoulders, blood trailing down one arm like it didn't belong to her. She walked as if carrying something no one could see, something dragging behind her spirit, bare feet blackened with dust. Her legs barely held. The wind didn't howl then. It hushed, as if afraid to speak over whatever this was. She reached the edge of his fence line, stopped, looked up, and collapsed. The dust rose like a sigh. Around her, he didn't run. He hadn't run in years. He simply stood, watching then, like a man who wasn't sure if he was awake. He set his tools down in the dry grass and walked slow toward her. His boots crunched over brittle weeds. He took in the shape of her ribs showing through torn cloth. Bruises dark and old, one side of her face swollen, lips cracked. She didn't look at him. Her eyes were closed, lashes sticky with sweat and dirt. But her chest moved, barely. She wasn't dead, not yet. He knelt beside her like a man kneeling before an altar. His hands hovered, unsure, rough palms that hadn't held anything fragile in years. The air around her felt different. Like standing too close to lightning that hadn't struck yet, he reached out, touched her wrist. It twitched. Her breath caught. He didn't speak. Words felt useless, almost offensive in a moment like this. Instead, he slid one arm beneath her knees, the other behind her back. She was lighter than she should have been, like someone who'd been emptied of everything but stubbornness. As he lifted her, her head fell against his chest. His heart didn't race. It thudded slow, like it always had. He walked toward the house, the dust settling behind him like closing pages. Inside, it was dark and quiet. The house hadn't held company in years, let alone something as delicate and defiant as her. He laid her gently on the old cot by the fire. The quilt there had once belonged to someone, but the name had faded with time. He covered her with it anyway. She didn't stir. He stood a long while, staring at her face in the lamplight. Blood dried in a thin line from her temple to her chin. Her lips moved, no words, just breath and a sound like wind through dry reeds. He brought water in a chipped tin cup, left it on the stool beside her. Then, without thinking why, he pulled the rocking chair close and sat. Outside, the wind picked up again, brushing the porch in soft rhythms, rustling the fence that had brought her to him. The old Mare whinnied. Low, then quieted. Somewhere on the ridge, a coyote cried once, not a threat, just a note in the night song. He sat and watched her sleep, one elbow on his knee, the other hand holding his jaw like it weighed too much. He did not pray. Not out loud, but somewhere in the back of his ribs, something loosened, something that hadn't moved in years. A quiet knowing settled over him, heavy and strange. She hadn't come to die here. Not yet, and he hadn't helped her because he was kind. He helped her because the wind told him to, and out here the wind was the only thing that never lied. The fever came like a tide, slow at first, then full and unforgiving. For 2 days she drifted in and out of shadow, sweat soaking the old quilt, her lips cracking beneath words he couldn't quite place. Her voice was raw wind, murmuring syllables. In a tongue he half knew from childhood, the one the missionaries had warned him never to speak. The one his mother whispered when no one was listening. He didn't speak back, just watched. Listened, waited. When her breath hitched, he wrung out the cool cloth again, laid it across her forehead. His fingers trembled, not from fear but from something older. A reverence he didn't remember having for anything living. The wounds he'd cleaned were shallow, but cruel. Strips across her back. Bruises that shaped themselves like fists. Old ribs that shifted wrong when she breathed. A cut above her knee that looked fresh, still red, still angry. She hadn't just wandered. She'd escaped. She hadn't just fallen. She'd fled. He fed the fire in the hearth while she slept, careful to keep it low, soft, steady. He left bowls of broth on the table, untouched each time. When the food turned cold, he didn't toss it. He simply poured it back into the pot. Tried again next morning. On the second night, moonlight spilled like silver oil across the floor. He sat in the rocker by the window, eyes half shut, hand absently smoothing the worn wood of the armrest. She stirred, then moved. He didn't rise, just watched as she pushed herself up with shaking arms, slid one bare foot to the floor, then the other. She rose slow, like someone stepping out of a dream, and limped toward the door. Her hands reached for the handle. She paused, wobbled. He stood, walked to the counter, poured a tin cup of water, set it gently by the door, and stepped away. She glanced back, eyes hollow, not frightened, just resigned, like someone who'd learned not to expect kindness to stay. But she didn't open the door. She sank to the floor beside it, wrapped herself in the quilt, and drank the water in silence. That was all. The next morning, she was still there. The end of the week, they'd found a rhythm that had no name. She didn't thank him. He didn't ask her to. She swept the dust from the floor in long, quiet arcs, collected kindling with hands that still shook but no longer bled. One day she brought him the saddle strap he'd meant to fix for months, mended now, the stitching crooked but strong. He nodded once. She nodded back. They never spoke of her scars. He saw them, though, when she leaned to stir the stew pot, when she bent at the creek to wash her hands. A map of pain carved across her, burns near the collarbone, marks shaped like brands. Skin that had learned how to flinch before touch came, and still she moved with grace. Not pride, but defiance, like she would not be ruined by the hands that had tried to break her. He worked slower now, just so she'd have time to catch up beside him. She fed the mare and whispered to her in that same tongue that held the sound of rivers and sorrow. Some evenings, when the sky bled amber behind the hills, she sat on the steps while he smoked his pipe. The silence between them wasn't awkward. It stretched like a blanket. He'd glance at her and find her looking up at the stars, always the stars, and in her eyes he saw something ancient. Not fear. Not loss, something heavier than both. Memory. The kind of grief only carried by those who survived when they weren't supposed to. That night, the coyotes began their cry early, long before the moon rose. One howled, then two, then the whole pack. A high, mournful chorus from the ridge. The horses stirred in the pen. The mares snorted, stomped, turned in tight, anxious circles. He went to the door, hand brushing the rifle without touching it. She was already there, standing barefoot on the porch. Her eyes fixed on the north, not blinking, and that's when he saw it. A faint line just above her ankle, not a wound. A symbol, carved, not tattooed, old, he couldn't read it, not fully, but he'd seen one like it once, back when he was younger. When he rode with men who thought fear was something you earned by drawing blood. He remembered a battle. Remembered warriors with paint on their faces and symbols etched into skin like prayers meant to outlive the body. This one was nearly faded. But it burned in his memory, brighter than fire. He didn't ask her what it meant. He just nodded once. Turned, walked back inside, took his father's rifle down from the wall where it had hung like a warning for years. Cleaned it slow, oiled the parts that squeaked. Sharpened the old skinning knife by the firelight, the edge catching glints of orange like sun off a river. She watched him from the doorway. Said nothing. And in that moment, something passed. Between them, not agreement, not alliance, understanding, whatever had marked her. It hadn't finished its hunt, but now she wasn't alone. And out here, in this dry-boned land where nothing bloomed easy, even silence could be a promise. He didn't ask where she came from. He didn't ask what hunted her. He simply loaded the rifle and leaned it by the door. And she stepped into the room that night, the same one she'd nearly crawled away from. She didn't sleep by the door anymore. She lay on the cot. And he slept by the fire. As the wind outside whispered the beginning of something neither of them had the words for. The rain came like an old friend, unannounced, unhurried, soft as breath on skin. It fell over the valley in sheets of silver, soaking the brittle grass, washing dust from the bones of the earth. For the first time in months, the land drank, without choking. The air smelled of iron and memory. Inside the house, they stayed quiet. The wind no longer cried. It listened. For 3 days, the storm held. Mist clung to the windows, blurred the view, softened every edge. The fire in the hearth crackled slow, content to burn without urgency. Her boot sat by the door, drying. His hat hung from the hook, still dripping. She sat near the window most days, watching the rain, fingers curled around a chipped mug she rarely drank from. Her silence no longer felt like a wall, more like a bridge not yet crossed. He didn't press. He'd learned by now, when the soul is ready, it speaks. It was on the second evening, just after dusk, that her voice broke the hush. He was peeling potatoes, slow and steady. She sat across from him, hands idle, face lit only by firelight. He didn't look up when she spoke. Not at first. There was a man, she said. He said I was special. The knife paused against the cutting board, not out of shock. Out of respect. He wasn't the first to say it, but he was the first I wanted to believe. The rain tapped the roof like fingers on a drum. He brought me east. Promised land, safety, a place where I wouldn't be seen as trouble. Her voice didn't break. It cracked like something long frozen beginning to thaw. He took me to a house. One with doors that didn't open unless you paid? Windows. Too high to climb. I wasn't the only one there. She stared into the fire. Her shadow flickered across the wall beside his, smaller, but just as solid. I helped 2 girls get out. Told them to run during the storm, like this one. Thought maybe it would cover their scent. She looked up then. And though the flames danced, her eyes didn't reflect them. I didn't run, not yet. I made sure they had time, took the beatings, took the blame. Then, when no one watched, I left. Still, he said nothing. Just placed the knife gently on the table and folded his hands. They've been hunting me since. Not just the men who kept us, but the ones who paid to look away. The ones who need me gone so their names stay. Clean. The rain deepened, like it grieved with her. I didn't come here to die, she said. I came here because I didn't know where else the wind would let me go. At last he met her gaze, and in his face, she didn't find pity. She found recognition, not of the pain, but of the choice to live anyway. She asked, quietly, "Why did you help me?" He looked at the fire for a long time, then, just as soft, "I didn't?" She blinked, confused. "The land did. The wind chose. I only listened." The next morning, the rain lightened, and so did she. She stepped into the sun like someone returning from war. Picked up a hammer. Helped him mend the broken beams of the corral, even when her hands bled. He taught her how to oil the fence posts. She taught him how to spot bird nests before the wind knocked them down. Sometimes, she sang not words but low humming that reminded him of rivers. Other times, they sat in the hay shed, side by side, not touching, not speaking, just breathing, One afternoon, they found a lost calf near the creek. She carried it back herself. Another day, he found a braid of her hair tucked into the rafters, a gift or a charm. He never asked. They didn't name it. Whatever this was, but it was no longer silence. It was something holy. Something that felt like home. That evening, the wind changed again. He was in the garden pulling weeds that had no business growing. She was hanging laundry on the line, face lifted to the breeze like she could read it. The horizon darkened. Not with storm, with dust. He saw at first a long, low plume, snaking up from the red dirt, fast, wide. She turned before he called out, no. Panic in her. Just awareness. He fetched the rifle, but his hands were calm. They stood together on the porch. 2 pairs of boots on old planks. He counted, 1 rider. Then 3. Then a dozen. By the time the dust reached the edge of the fence line, there were 50 painted faces, spears, bows, some carried rifles. All sat their horses like statues carved from thunder. She stepped forward. He moved to stop her, then stopped himself. She wasn't afraid. The lead rider, older than the others, slid from his horse. His hair was braided with feathers grayed by time. Scars lined his jaw, but his eyes held a kind of fire that didn't burn. It glowed. He walked forward. Slow. Deliberate. And when he reached the porch, he knelt, right there in the dust, before the girl who had once been hunted, once been broken. He placed both hands on the earth, lowered his head. The others, dismounted, silent, reverent. They did not come for war. They came to honor. And behind them, the sun sank low, casting long shadows across the red earth still damp from rain. The man and the girl stood side by side, wordless. Watching as the past arrived, not as a threat, but as something long awaited. The old man stepped forward through the silent field of warriors. His face was carved by wind and memory, eyes the color of stormwood bark. The painted riders behind him remained still, like shadows pinned to the dusk. She stood trembling, but not from fear. When the elder spoke, the air shifted. His words came slow, in a tongue the rancher didn't know, but she did. Her breath caught. Her knees softened. She clutched the porch rail, and her tears fell soundless as the rain had days before. She dropped to her knees, not in defeat, but reverence. He was not a stranger. None of them were. The man who spoke had once held her as a child. The mark on her ankle, the twisted braid of ink she had always tried to hide, was no brand of ownership. It was a crest, a symbol. Blood and story. She had not been discarded. She had been stolen. Her mother was the daughter of a great chief. Her father, the man who lured her mother away with false promises, had vanished with the child, hiding her from those who would know. And when she was old enough to remember, he sold her, that place of suffering. That wasn't her beginning. That was the middle of a tale that had tried to bury her in silence. The riders had come because a dream walker saw her return in smoke. Because prayers once whispered to the sky had finally been answered by wind and chance and a stranger's hand. They had not come for war. They had come for her. That night, around the fire, no one spoke much. The warriors sang low songs in a rhythm older than time, and she sat between them, her head bowed, eyes closed. Not as a captive, but as something newly born. The rancher kept to the edge of the firelight, a shadow in his own yard, until the elder came and sat beside him. "You think you're not part of this," the old man said in broken English, "but you are. You are the door the Spirit chose." He didn't answer, just nodded. The peace did not last long. 3 days later they came, bounty riders, 6 of them. Lean men with whiskey teeth and twitchy fingers, riding as if the land owed them a debt. They didn't see the signs, didn't feel the shift in the wind, didn't know that red earth remembers its children. The rancher sat on the front porch, hat low, rifle resting across his knees, not aimed, just there. The dust cloud behind the men was heavy. He knew what they wanted. He'd heard them before they even crossed the ridge. Loud, certain, greedy, they demanded her. Claimed she was a runaway, property. Their tone made it clear, this wasn't business. It was sport. But behind every rock, in every shadow, warriors watched. still and silent. Like the land itself had grown eyes, the bounty men chuckled. One of them stepped down from his horse, spat. "I'll say it slow, cowboy. Hand her over, and we'll leave the rest of your place standing." The rancher didn't blink. "She ain't here to hand over." That was all. It began and ended in less than a minute. The hills moved. The horses of the bounty men reared. Spears and arrows, not to kill, but to corral, came from nowhere. By the time the men could draw their guns, they were surrounded. When the dust cleared, they were on their knees, wrists bound in braided cord. Not a single wound, not a single death, but their power? Gone. Stripped by patience and unity. She watched it all from behind the fence. Watched the men who had once caged her now trapped like cattle, not with hate in her eyes, but something deeper. Grief. As they were led away, she didn't say a word. Didn't gloat. Just watched the horizon until their silhouettes were swallowed by the land. The next morning, she stood by the horse the rancher had fixed for her. His tools still hung from the post. She checked the saddle, adjusted the cinch. He came out with coffee, 2 mugs. Stopped when he saw her gear packed. "You sure?" he asked. She nodded. But she didn't look ready. She looked like someone carrying a ghost that finally had a name. He didn't try to stop her, didn't ask her to stay. She pressed something into his palm. A token, carved from river stone, smooth gray, etched with a sun. "Brother," she said. Then she swung onto the saddle, bareback, her hair loose and wild. She rode east, toward the mesas, toward her people, toward the stories that waited to be reclaimed. The ranch felt larger after she left. Not emptier, just wider. Like silence had depth again. The warriors stayed one more day. Repaired his barn roof. Fixed a fence without asking. Then they too were gone. All that remained was the tree he planted where she had once lain in the dirt, half buried and barely breathing. It was a young cottonwood. Thin, green, stubborn. Each morning he watered it by hand. Each night the wind came through its leaves like a memory learning how to sing. Final note to the audience, a whisper from the firelight. You won't hear her story in books. No headlines wrote her name, but healing doesn't always roar. Sometimes it walks on quiet feet, finds shelter in broken places, and leaves only when it's ready. She was not saved. She saved herself, with time, with tears, with the help of a stranger who didn't ask for her past before offering her a chair. That girl rode back into legend, but the man? He stayed. And every time the wind shifts in that valley, you can still hear her name rustling through the cottonwood leaves. The fire may go out, but the warmth? That stays forever.